Then I would like to welcome you to this session, to this workshop, with the title, as you can read it in the program, Reflective Practice Research Dialogues, demonstrating a format for research dialogues based on philosophical practice. Katja, if you could share the presentation, it would be great. Just the first slide. My name is Michael Noah Waiss. I'm Associate Professor at the University of Southeastern Norway. The original plan was to do this workshop together with my colleague, Guru Hansen-Helskog, professor in pedagogy. Unfortunately, she could not make it because of an emergency situation in her family. So I will do this session alone and by myself. The reason why we would have done it together is because we both use this approach of so-called reflective practice research actively in our teaching. We both work in teacher education. And this is a way, reflective practice research is a way how to do a certain philosophical practice within the field of education or academic education, higher education. Yes, Katja, if you could go over to the next slide, please. I would like to present you the approach of reflective practice research in a few words. Maybe some of you have already attended the panel session yesterday on philosophical practice and research. And there was also one practitioner and professor whose name is Anders Lindset, and it was actually him who gave the whole approach a name. Reflective practice research is an interdisciplinary research approach which has its roots in philosophical practice, and that is no wonder because Anders Lindset is a pioneer in the field of philosophical practice. In a certain way, it is similar to participatory action research, where one is not primarily doing research on or for, but with people. So those of you who are familiar with action research maybe also know participatory action research. And there you often go into the field, into a concrete situation. For example, the question could be, how can a school deliver better food to its students? How could it deliver better meals? And then it's not only the researchers going into the field and to the school to figure out, but it's all who are involved, like the teachers, the students, and so on. The difference here with reflective practice research, however, is that it's a form of philosophical investigation which takes its point of departure in one's practice experience or in one's professional's practice. That means the starting point is an experience from one's own practice, and the purpose is not necessarily to solve any problem as it would be in action research. Rather, it is to get a deeper understanding of one's own practice and to improve as practitioner. For example, as philosophical practitioner, as pedagogue, as a nurse, and so on. And another purpose is to develop practical knowledge in terms of phronesis. So it's not necessarily know-how knowledge, techne, as it is called in Aristotle's terms. It is more phronesis which is developed. Good. If you could go further to the next slide. Yes. What you see here is three-step rocket, because I thought it's a good metaphor for reflective practice research or for the reflective practice research dialogue. The reflective practice research dialogue is only one phase in the research process. And after the dialogue, you might use what you have learned or your insight from the dialogue further on, for example, in essay writing and so on. So it's not simply done with this dialogue. Even though the dialogue is a form of investigation, it already is a form of research. It's very often just one phase in the research process. And it can be compared to a certain extent to focus group interviews or to semi-structured interviews in other research approaches. The 3 steps are, as you can see here, first, concrete reflection. Here, one of the group members. You can do such a research dialogue either in groups or you can do it one-on-one. That depends on the situation and the project and so on. But if it's done in a group, then one participant is telling about an experience from his or her own practice, for example, his philosophical practice, her teaching practice, and so on, which made him or her wondering or even perplexed. This is also called experience of discrepancy, which means you went into the situation with a certain expectation, and what you experienced then was completely different from that expectation. There was a certain discrepancy between what you thought would happen and what actually happened. The others, while one person is sharing that experience, are just listening. And after the person is finished with the experience sharing, the others can ask factual questions until everyone can imagine the shared experience. This is, in a certain way, also the phenomenological step. And for those of you who are familiar with the Socratic method after Nelson, this is quite similar there too, where a dialogue participant is sharing an experience on the topic under investigation. Whereas here you don't have a topic in the beginning, you just ask, can you recall an experience from your own practice that made you wondering once? Then this experience is shared. After that step, after the phenomenological step, you go over to the next step or phase, which is critical reflection. And here the group investigates the following questions. What is at stake in the shared or told experience? And what is this experience in its essence about? The goal here is, with this hermeneutical step, to develop 2 or 3 more general, or you could also call it universal, themes that can be investigated further from more theoretical and philosophical perspectives in order to get a deeper understanding of this practice experience. So here in the critical reflection, it is more to develop and dismantle, so to speak, certain things that are enclosed in the told and shared experience. After that step, you go over to the last step, which is theoretical reflection. In that theme, or in that step, the themes developed in the previous step are brought into dialogue with certain theoretical and philosophical perspectives. And here you can ask which theories and theoretical perspectives could be relevant in order to better understand the themes that we developed in the previous step. And with that, you can see where you end up. So it's not, as you can already see with that structure of the dialogue, the goal is not to solve any problem. The goal is rather to shed light on an experience that made you wondering as a practitioner. And these perspectives are both theoretical, but also more critical in terms of what is it actually that is at stake here in that told story. Not only what is it about, but what is at stake. And then you can see what is the result? Is it a deeper understanding? Can you see something that you can improve in your own practice? Or maybe it's just a new idea and a different perspective on what happened. Yes, that was a very short and brief description of the reflective practice research dialogue, the different steps. Is there anyone so far who has any questions to that structure? If yes, please write it down in the chat. Nothing is coming so far. Then could you go over to the next slide, please, Katja? Yes, even though the previous slide might have looked a bit complicated, reflective practice research dialogues, they are not rocket science. Even though reflective practice research might be comparable to a 3-step rocket, it's still not rocket science. It's just the 3 steps that are followed in such a dialogue. And my suggestion now is that a volunteer here of you in the audience is sharing an experience from his or her own philosophical practice that made you wondering for whatever reason. Of course, the point here is not that you deliver yourself. You should not share an experience that you feel uncomfortable with. The point here rather is that sometimes we go out of a certain session, of a certain dialogue with a guest, with participants, and we are still wondering about what was it that happened here. You still have no understanding of it. And I mean rather those kind of experiences. And then you can share that experience, and then all together we are trying to follow these 3 steps that I just presented. Of course, it would be important, the person who is sharing a story, please take care of the guest or the participants who participated, because their personal, how should I say, their privacy should be protected, and their personal identity should not be disclosed. But I think I don't have to explain that further. It's just research ethics. Share the experience in a way so that nobody can recognize the person who was involved too. And now my question is there anyone willing to share an experience that made him or herself wondering from her own practice as philosophical practitioner? Maybe some of you still need a little bit of time, and I can share some of my experiences with that, so that you just can get an idea of what is this actually about. Guillaume and me, we started with that approach because we had the same strange experience over a certain period of time, and that was that several of our students, they were very eager to ask what will we get for the final exam in this course, and how can we pass the test. That was the main question. But they were very lazy, and they were holding pretty much back when it was about getting engaged in discussion and dialogue. So whenever we asked a question, and we often have groups between, let's say, 13 and 45 people, they were just holding back. It was not possible to do a normal dialogue with them. And then you could ask, is it because they don't dare, or what is it actually there? And so we start to investigate the whole phenomenon. And what we figured out after a while was these students, they were coming directly from school, from high school, and they were growing up and educated in a system that was very much problems solving oriented, which means the teacher would tell them, okay, this is the book, this is the content that you have to learn, and if you can manage the content, you pass the test. This is what it's all about, for example, in mathematics or in English or in Norwegian. So they were raised to solve a problem and to pass a test, and they could not see the point. For example, they could not see the point when we said, okay, let's do a philosophical investigation. What does it mean to be a good pedagogue, for example? Nobody was sharing anything. Because this is what we figured out in that research, they thought that this kind of investigation, it doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't get you anywhere because it's not a problem solving. It's an open question, and you don't land on a correct answer. And here we all of a sudden could see, okay, for them it's always about delivering the correct answer. And there was a case, we did once a workshop, a philosophical practice workshop with them. And we invited them, we started with a Socratic dialogue inspired by the Nelson approach. And so a first student should share a story from personal life on the topic of courage. And one student really managed, and then another student, until they all of a sudden realized, hey, here we are investigating our own lives. and then they all stopped. They kind of quit. They couldn't really get into that anymore. And then we were trying to tell them, okay, what, how can you be a good teacher if you're not investigating and reflecting yourself? How can you understand your students if you don't understand yourself? And that was simply too much for them. So that was a kind of experience of discrepancy for us. What we came up then with was this term of, it was developed by a colleague from Denmark. His name is Finn Torbjørn Hansen, and he uses the term the Eichmannization of education, which means, okay, we're educating students in a way that they're used to problem solving and to give the correct answer. Critical thinking is relevant because critical thinking doesn't make you pass the test. And with that term, we could better understand where the problem actually was. And it was much easier for us then, with that new understanding of our students, to approach them from a different, in a different way. This was more or less the result of our research with them. And now I really have to say it works much better. During the last year, even though much, if not all, was digital, it worked much better with them. Okay, now I shared this experience of mine. Are there any questions, or is anyone willing to share an experience from your own philosophical practice that made you perplexed or wondering, and that you are willing to investigate further together with the others here? So this can be a kind of demonstration for this whole reflective practice research dialogue approach. Is there anyone volunteering? You start to remind me of my students, if I may say that. But it's completely okay. It's completely okay. But are there any other questions? You can also ask me questions. And I just shared a story with my students. And are there any questions to that approach? Okay, there is a question. I will read it. Is there maybe regular monthly online group of us practitioners in English where philosophical practitioners can share their experiences from working with clients, where we could share examples of problem solving and dilemmas in practice? I would love to participate in such online group because I'm still in education and that would be very educational. Okay. If anyone has such a group, please let Andrea know. I think that's a very good point that you bring up here, Andrea, because this reflective practice research is actually also a form how colleagues can talk about their practice experiences. You have to imagine it like this, like doctors share their experiences and cases, psychotherapists share their cases. This is also what teachers do. And the question is there any kind of forum, for example, or platform or format by which you can do that? And here, this reflective practice research approach is one of these ways or formats that you could use. Yes, but of course, there's another person, Taisia, if I spelled that correctly or pronounced that correctly, who would also be happy about such a group. But is there anyone who wants to share an experience, or there's one who has the microphone open?
Yeah, it was me. It's Taisia.
Hi.
Yeah, so I'm unfortunately was on another meeting, and it ended just now, so I missed the very beginning of your presentation. But what I've heard in the end is yes, this split between practitioners and participants, like whether if I'm aware about myself and if I'm aware about myself well enough, what should I expect from my student or from my participant? And I can share my experience that the more I'm aware about myself, the less I want to be aware of myself. So this creates some kind of difficulty with communication with my clients, because it's kind of a different interest in myself and in the other. There can be like interest like curiosity, like you don't know what in front of you, but you are not afraid of what is in front of you, and you are curious to explore and do it mutually. But there is another state of all this. It's like you don't know what in front of you, but you're so scared that you even don't want to know what in front of you. And this create the huge problem in practitioner and in client or student, because if I'm in this dreadful, scareful modus, I even won't be able to explore anything, even if I have this like beat of curiosity. So maybe the first thing that like should or might be done is like this attitudinal state. It's like in which state you are now. Are you in this explorational, curious, open, or you are just somewhere very scared just to think or feel or whatever?
Okay, Taisia, thank you very much for sharing. That I think that was a very brief and short but very impressive experience that you just shared. Namely, your experience that when you philosophize, you figure out the more you know about yourself, the less you want to know yourself. And here it is. I think this is a very explicit experience of discrepancy. And now this is example of a philosophical practice as a practitioner. And now my question is, I don't want to go further into the details of that story. I just want to use this expression, your experience, namely, the more I know about myself, the less I want to know. And I would like to, if it's okay for you, Taisia, I would like to invite the others to go over now to the next step of such a reflective practice research dialogue, and ask them what is it that is at stake here? Not necessarily what is it about, but what is the essence and what is at stake in that described experience or statement, the statements that followed from the experience of experiencing philosophical practice. What do you think? You can type it in, write it into the chat. What is at stake here? And here it can be themes, general themes like anxiety. It could also be courage, exactly the opposite. So what might be at stake here in that example?
Well, I can tell that first of all, it's a personal image, and it's the limits, I would say even the idea of personal limits, or idea of power of thinking in a way. Yeah, that and the clarity of thinking, this idea of trust. Say, can I trust the impression or image of myself or of the other? Can I trust the instrument I'm using? So my thinking instrument, is it like clear, good, distinguishable enough, or something is wrong with it, and I might miss something, or might have a misconception of something. And in this case, for example, not just myself, but my client would be misled.
Misled because?
Because the instrument that I'm using, the mind, that I'm having, or the state of mind that I'm into at the moment, might not be the proper one. Yeah. So this to answer to your questions, like what is on stake, the trust to the instrument is the thinking instrument that I'm using is the right instrument to apply to the client.
Yeah. So it's before I comment something on that, I would just like to read the statements of some participants. Alexander wrote, maybe what could be at stake too is disenchantment, fear of nothingness, or fear of chaos. Or Cecilia wrote, fear to discover something different or bad, fearful of the image of myself and not to recognize myself in it. All these points, I think, are very interesting. But what came to my mind, in addition to that, is also it's not only, as you just said, the thinking instrument that you use for yourself, but also this responsibility that is at stake towards your client. So, as an additional topic here, responsibility could be listed.
Yes, that's true.
Just a second. If you go further with that, then another point here is, when I say responsibility, it's also the way how you respond to others and the way how you respond towards yourself. And what I see here with that statement from this experience, the more you know about yourself, the less you want to know yourself. And here it's about this. Okay, you go further in, you see more and more, and the less you want to see. And the question then is, when I imagine that I go into a room and what I see in the room I don't like, what I do normally? I go out of the room. so but still, you're here, and I don't want to psychologize this. I'm just a bit curious now. There are certain things that you don't like to see there, but still you're staying there. What could that be? What is the reason why you still stay in the room? Or still look into the mirror, as another metaphor?
Well, if I would speak for myself, that it's hope and like a bit of trust, I guess, and a bit of will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I guess it's more like the trust, the basic one, because there is some kind of like basic trust that I'm able to cope what I face in the very end, even if it won't be like the very best my performance. But in any case, it would be good enough just to go further.
Mm-hmm. So here it's you use the term basic trust and hope, and also will, and this is what you're, if I understood you, not only what you're after, but this is what you're actually intending with staying or still looking into the mirror. So even though the more you know about yourself, the less you want to know, but still you want, let's say, basic trust, develop basic trust. So would that's my question. Would basic trust be one thing that is at stake here?
Yeah, it would be, because I mean it might be shaken. Yeah, if one would face something that is like no longer go along with something that you see, yeah, this trust might be might decreased. and it might decrease to this kind of level where you no longer can use it or apply it. It won't no longer motivate you enough to continue.
Here, Andrea is writing, it seems to me that despite insecurity and responsibility in our mind, we can become confident in our intention to help and listen to the client. So how does that respond with you? Like in your practice, you are afraid, to summarize that, you're afraid that you're using thinking instruments and even applying them on your client, instrument that you yourself are not convinced of. But how about that? How about that suggestion? Okay, listening also as a certain more passive act instead of applying an instrument. If you understand what I mean, what the difference is.
Well, I'm not sure I understand you fully. I see this split between activeness and passiveness, and applying some critical thinking, let's say, is active and listening is passive. That's what so far I understood. But what is your general question about this split?
I think that we touched something important here, and that is, if I may ask you now about your own philosophical practice. Do I understand you right that you have the self-understanding as a practitioner, not only as a person and human being, but as a practitioner, that you are applying something on the client, that you are doing something with the client, instead of just sitting there and listening?
Actually, it's vice versa, and that's the problem that is just I'm facing with now. I used to question much, and I used to apply the critical thinking approach a lot, and I was quite sharp in it. But when I start start getting connected more with my body, with my emotions, I face with the fact that I no longer can do this, that my body is just resisting the fact of the criticism. I just can't stand it anymore. And now I came to the fact that I'm much more listening and letting my client talk. And it's no longer going along with my vision of how I should practice. And now I'm questioning myself whether what I'm still doing can be called philosophical practice, or it's just, I don't know even how it can be called. It's not even psychology. It's not small talk because it's more or less conceptual, but what is it? I still cannot fully understand.
Yes, maybe there are some ideas. What is it? It's obviously a listening practice. Whether listening is also a philosophical practice, I think that can be at least debated. But would you agree that listening is an important part of philosophizing?
Listening is an important part, but this might create a problem for a client, because while a client is talking, he might be so captured by his speech that he, at the moment, is not listening to himself. And that's where questions come, or that's where mirroring or reflecting come, just to let a client still hear himself or herself. And that's the problem in this long listening part. So just the client can get lost on its way and just forget where he was and what exactly he was expressing and how explicit he was at the moment.
But I see your point. But are you interrupting sometimes and ask questions then?
Sometimes yes, and that's the split between clients. For example, some clients are easily can be interrupted, and they are quite fine with it, and they're not feel that I'm disrespecting them when I'm interrupting, and they're interested in inviting me, in this self-reflective process in a way. But there are different type of clients which are very in need to talk, and sometimes these clients are, for example, from the psychological background. For example, one of my clients, she's a psychologist herself, so she's so overwhelmed, and she has no other space to express herself other than this. So there is a need to talk, and like to talk. And in this case, interrupting would be might be seen as an act of aggression, or act of like, I don't know, not respecting her borders in a way, or not understanding her, or not letting her be even. And with this type of clients, it's, for me, for example, it's very difficult just to find this precise moment when it's okay and when it's not okay to interrupt.
I understand. I fully understand. When and that's all like this. When can we interrupt and when shouldn't we? But still, what I heard now from what you were telling is also this question that is, at least in my interpretation, quite essential here, and that is, as I said previously, is listening a philosophical practice. And it's not necessary that we find answers on that question now, but just is listening. Is that also part of philosophizing? Or are we philosophizing when we're actively thinking, when we're actively critically thinking? And how is that dynamic? And here, obviously, you have a conversation, and not only a conversation, but a dialogue. And so I was a bit wondering here, because you said that you were afraid that you're imposing something onto the client that you don't want to impose, like certain instruments which you for yourself think are not good. And now my question is, how would you define dialogue for yourself?
Well, I would define it like a mutual process of reflection where both are like in a way in sound, so both are listening and answering in a coherent and in appropriate, but that's, I guess, not the right translation of my word that I have in Russian, but let's say applicable. Yeah, so it should be the response should be on the precise question, not something that is like close or on the same topic. So there should be some kind of a let's call it coherency, or appropriateness. And so it's an appropriate interchange of questions and answers. Let's call it like that.
And with that, you also answered the question whether listening is a philosophical practice, namely that it is an essential part of dialogue and therefore also an essential part of philosophical practice. Would you agree?
It is, yes, I agree. But this agreement, let's say, creates a problem, because it is, I can say that I'm listening from my part, but there is a client that is who is listening as well to me saying something, to me making a comment, or to me posing a question. And not all the time, or most of the time, client might not be in this listening mode, because mostly what is happening in the client's mind while the practitioner is saying something, he is still chewing his thought, the previous one. Yeah. And it's not a listening mode, it's reflecting mode. And the art, let's say, of a practitioner is to invite a client as well into this listening mode, not to express this mode himself.
But then we have a little problem here. Problem. It's not really a problem. And that is, that is then what you're describing here. What you just said with the last few sentences here. How it actually is in the practice. Isn't that different from dialogue? Isn't that something else than what you just described previously, what a dialogue is?
It is, and that's the problem, because I mean, even if we practice dialogue and we intend it to be a dialogue, it's not always a dialogue, because it's let's say the place where we should invite our client at the very end, but it's not the place where our client might be from the very beginning, because from the very beginning it would be rather like kind of a monologue with some bits of of a dialogue. Yeah, and as long as practice is going, it's bit by bit becoming a dialogue. So it's kind of a let's say maybe not a final goal, but one of the goals of the practice itself, like to come finally to a dialoguing mode.
Okay, yeah, but that is something that is something new, because what you just said is, on the one hand, that in philosophical practice it's not always dialogue. There are also other forms of conversation or of communication. For example, the monologue that you just said.
Well, I'm not sure
And
that
here,
it's philosophical, actually. That's the problem.
and that's very good that you say that, because here we get into this kind of dynamic, or dynamic, what's it called in English? Dichotomy, if I use the right term. Or let's just simply say this dynamic between what is philosophical practice ideally for you, how you think it, and what is actually going on in your real practice with the client. And here you see that what is happening in reality is something else than what you ideally expect it to be. And here you see that this is this experience of discrepancy. So it's not really fitting together. What are we doing with that? And this is exactly what reflective practice research is about, because we are reflecting a practice, your philosophical practice, and what is happening here. How can we deal or learn to deal with that discrepancy between these two? I mean, can you decide to say, okay, sometimes philosophical practice is not only dialogue, it can also be something completely else. It can be a monologue, it can be simply silence, it can be reading. Is there a possible way of saying yes to your practice? Or are you tending to put it very, to summarize it in a very strict way, to say, no, I have to do dialogue and that's it. And if I don't do dialogue, if it's drifting into something else, then I don't do philosophical practice.
I want to come to the point when I'm okay with myself to call anything I'm doing philosophical. But I'm just, let's say, on the way towards it. because in any case, I need a criteria. Like, okay, even if I'm listening or if I'm letting my client talk for these next 5 minutes, but there should be something in our conversation during this 1 hour on 1 hour and a half that made this communication philosophical. And if there is such a criteria during this time, then okay, I will be okay with the fact that there was way much more talking than I used to do, like, for example, 2 years ago. But if there won't be any criteria that will make it philosophical, then yes, I would obviously have a problem with that. It's like, oh, what was it?
I see your point. I see your point. By the way, Patricia Murphy, she wrote, I know some practitioners who expect their clients to be present for a lecture. Others have different understandings of what we are doing. And that's, I think, a really good point, Patricia, because it really asks for the essence. What is it actually that is at stake when we are saying this is philosophical practice, or is it, or isn't it? And I think that what we have done so far, we could go on. What I would do now is to investigate further these different points. Just to summarize this step, we are still in the step of critical reflection, Tasia, and that was, we started out with a few general themes that might be at stake in your shared experience. And these were, on the one hand, basic trust, that was quite central, and also hope, but also responsibility and disenchantment. Some other participants wrote maybe openness and vulnerability. And then we went over from the more personal level to the more philosophical practice level, and asked what is at stake there. And there we came to this dynamic of active passive, asking, is listening actually a philosophical practice? And we figured out that listening is definitely an important aspect of dialogue. And you described the ideal philosophical practice as a dialogue practice. So yes, listening is part or is philosophical practice. But then you came up with something interesting, and that was, well, ideally it is dialogue, but in reality it's often something else. And then you said, well, I still feel to be on the way. And I think that is a very that is actually for me, it would be an insight. This is also a form of self-knowledge, where you see, okay, it's progress, it's still progress, it's development, it's change. So maybe this is also what is at stake here, that it's not static. What is at stake here is actually the changing and developing part in it. And maybe that's part of philosophical practice. I'm just wondering, I don't know. But what we can do now in the last 10 minutes, because then I would like to open up for some general questions, is that we all together see what kind of theoretical perspectives could shed light on what we were philosophizing about now. As I said, basic trust was an essential theme, hope was an essential theme, listening, dialogue, and also this being on the way. Are there any philosophers, philosophies, or theories that you could think might eventually be relevant in order to better understand these general themes that we were just bringing forward due to that experience of Taisia?
Well, here's my weakest part, because I'm not that quite familiar with theories, and that's one of the things that make me doubt about whether what I'm doing is philosophical at all or not. Because theories is about knowledge, and knowledge is kind of finite in a way, and there is no process and progress in it, and for me it's kind of a dead thing, and that's why I even know I'm even don't not going into this way in a way.
Yeah.
So
But you know what the good part is, Tasia? It's not you who have to come up with theories in this case. So in this session now, you can just lean back and say, okay, if the others want, they can. If Michael wants, he can, but I won't, and that's perfectly fine. So
yeah, that would be great.
yeah. No, but I have one theory that came to my mind with respect to the term of basic trust. I think that a really known person who used the term frequently in his approach was Erickson, and he's a psychologist, and I never really liked his approach. I liked the term very much, but I never really liked his way of what, yeah, his theory. But there is also another one. He's often called psychotherapist, psychiatrist, and philosopher. And now you can choose. And that's Viktor Frankl. And he said he used the term basic trust also in the sense of ultimate meaning. And that is, he was saying, okay, a general aspect of the human condition is that we all are capable and actually wanting to search for meaning and find meaning. And we're also capable to search for ultimate meaning, whether we call that God or the divine, or whether we call that just community, whatever, but we are capable of that. To find meaning in something and to search for something that is way bigger than us. And this comes to my mind, his approach, and this is also how he defines spirituality. It's for him, spirituality is nothing else than he calls it the spiritual unconscious. And what he means with the spiritual unconscious, that is nothing else than there is always something that we don't know. And that is way bigger than us. And this is what I really like, because you just said that with knowledge and knowing. And also here, Patricia wrote, you assume knowledge is static, but there are many other ideas of what true knowledge is. And here I fully agree with you. And I even see a connection to this not knowing of Frankl, which actually is inspired by Socrates. There's so much that we don't know. And that could, for me, this could be a perspective on the term knowledge, because this is what we started out with. Knowledge, to know yourself, and you want to know yourself less and less by that. But what is actually knowledge? And what does it mean that there is so much that we don't know? And there will always be. So this is just one idea how we could shed light with a theory on the term basic trust, and with that also on knowledge. Maybe there are other ideas on the term listening, which was also a key aspect of our conversation now. Yeah, you raised your hand, Tasia.
Yeah, I just want to comment so far while I'm still recalling what I want to comment.
Please.
I'm aware about Frankl and his idea because I was studying logotherapy long ago. And that's exactly what brought me to philosophical counseling, because it wasn't enough for me. And the idea of that there is something bigger than us that we won't know, and that we even not capable to know, because he has this three vision of meaning in life, of life, and this let's say general overall meaning that we won't be able to perceive in any stage of our life. So one meaning that we are able to perceive in every moment of our being, Another meaning is that we are able to perceive in the very end of our being, like just before our death. And the last meaning is that the meaning that he believes is there, but we have no instrument to prove it. But there is a belief that there is something bigger than us. And that's exactly what is uncomforting. It's like, if I'm not ever will be able to perceive this thing, how can I be trusting the instrument of thought that I'm using if I'm limited? That however, how long I would be like doing my best to know something, there won't be ever a limit of this knowledge. So it's like, why? Why at all? I should be bothered with knowing if there is no limit of this thing and will never be enough.
I see what you mean, and I understand also why you say that like that, and why you interpret Franklin that way. I interpret him a bit differently, and that is for me, he does not say there is something that we never can, like a God. There is a God, but unfortunately we never have the instruments to give proof of his existence. This is not how I understand it. It's more that there is so much that we don't know. And if I don't know it, then I don't know what it is. I don't know whether there is a God or not, but there is so much that I don't know. And it's I mentioned Finn Torbjørn Hansen with earlier in the beginning, but he also has a really good book. When it comes to this, I know that I don't know. I know that I'm not knowing, and this Socratic insight he expresses with the term "to stand in the open," and this is in fact the moment when you realize your existence within a world that you never can fully understand, that you never can fully know. There is always something that you can't control, that you can't see, that you can't understand. How can you learn to stand in that open? And I think it is exactly here where basic trust begins, and this is what Viktor Frankl meant with it, at least how I read him. This is exactly where you surrender, because you say, okay, from that point on, it's either jump or not to jump, and that's part of the human existence. But that we could philosophize about that way further. I would like to thank you, Taisia, very, very much for sharing, for contributing, also all the other ones who contributed here. Katja, if you just could show the third slide with the rocket from the presentation, because then I can explain a bit what we have done now so far.
Just a few seconds, I will show.
Yeah, we're not in a hurry.
Thank you very much for letting me. It was very unexpected, but very useful for me, and I hope it was like somehow representative for others.
I think so very much, and it because what I want to point out now when showing the slide here is that we used in the first step, the concrete reflection, we used in fact a very brief experience of Taisia that we didn't have to explore so much further in the first step. In fact, it was quite easy to go over and ask in the next step, in the critical reflection step, what is at stake here? And here you could see it was basic trust and hope, disenchantment, fear of self-image, and so on. And that was on a personal level. On the other hand, we also could see and investigate certain aspects that had to do with the practice, with philosophical practice as such. For example, being active and passive in a philosophical practice session. Also, is listening actually a philosophical practice? I'm sitting there being still, listening. Is that philosophizing or not? And then also the term dialogue, which belongs to more the practice part. And here you can see under 2 critical reflection, the goal with this hermeneutical step is to develop 2 or 3 more general or universal themes that can be investigated further from more theoretical and philosophical perspectives in order to get a deeper understanding of this practice experience or this professional practice. This is what it's about, in fact. Now, we are here at a conference with philosophical practitioners. I could do the same more or less with nurses, asking them, can you tell me something from your nurse practice, from your professional practice that made you wondering? And then we could go into that, and there would be aspects which are personal, and there would be aspects which would have to do with more general or universal aspects of practicing as a nurse. And both is kind of connected. And of course, this was a very short dialogue, and I just wanted to show what we were doing in the different steps. And then in the last step, the theoretical reflection, we actually used Viktor Frankl in order to shed light on the theme of basic trust, but also on the term of knowledge. We could have used another theoretical perspective, what is dialogue? And then we see, okay, with that theory of dialogue, are we really doing dialogue in philosophical practice? Are we always doing dialogue, or often something else too? So this is how you can reflect your own practice as a practitioner, for example, a philosophical practitioner. Okay, at this point, I just want to say thank you for contributing, especially Taisia. And now I would like to ask you for questions. Are there any questions to me? What has been done here? Questions about reflective practice in general?
Michael?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Maria. Hi.
Hi. You were saying that I also jumped in late, so excuse me for that. But when you mentioned you were working with students in education, and when you started with the reflective part, they didn't want to go into the room, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So, given what you just said, what would be some of the things that you would do to encourage them to go further into the room, which is similar to what you just said about the nurses? You know, you say, what are you wondering about? It's something personal, but it's also something general. Mm-hmm. So how would you use your nurse example, so to speak, with the students in the education students?
Yes, I see what you mean. Can you still hear me, Maria?
Yeah.
Okay, I see what you mean. Well, the way we solved it was the following. We knew, okay, this level of telling them that reflection is important and so great, it's not working. So what we did...
Right, I had that experience too.
Yeah, so what we did was to use quite simple dialogue exercises and telling them, okay, we have a certain curriculum for you for this study program, and dialogue or dialogical teaching is one of them. So how can you learn dialogical skills? This is how we approach them. I'm not a big fan of calling of teaching away skills, because I think that if you're into real dialogue, it's not a question of skills. But this was their language. This was simply their language, how they could understand that.
Yeah.
So we were saying, okay, we're teaching you certain skills, and then just like here, a few steps, dialogue with 3 steps. Do that in a small group with 3 students.
Okay.
And this is how we started. This is how we started. And then also experience sharing. For example, they had to go out to their teaching practice at different schools. When they were coming back asking, hey, how was it? How was your practice period now? Can you tell me a bit? What did go on? Then they would tell, and then, did you face any challenges there? Yes, of course. And with that, you can go into that. And then in this way, you can approach them either by telling them, okay, now you can receive skills. That's important because as a teacher, you need a lot of teaching skills in order to be a good teacher. This is how they think. Or you just invite them for, let's say, a natural conversation. Let them share experiences and see where the conversation goes. And then for me, it's also very natural to say, okay, do you realize? But there are certain more general themes in there. For example, self-confidence, self-trust. What can you relate to that? And with that, I'm coming in with the more philosophical aspects. For them, it feels like a natural conversation, and for me too. Then you can ask, are we all of a sudden having a dialogue or still a conversation? You understand? It's more this what I learned here was that also as a lecturer at university, as a professor, it's also okay. It's not that students have to learn my professional language. In fact, also I have to learn their language.
Right.
And here I don't mean language in the sense of key
No, I hear you.
topics. And that has to do with how they were educated, and they are not aware of that language. In fact, I use probably, and we here as philosophical practitioners also use a language that we are not aware of, in which way we use that language. Maybe, and in the same way, these students they are so used to education is about passing exams and so on. Okay, how to get them out from that and still relate to where they are. I don't know whether this is an answer to your question, but as you see, for me it was an investigation, a philosophical investigation, a reflection that gave me a better understanding of both my practice as lecturer, but also of how can I invite others for philosophical dialogue in teacher education. Yes, thank you very much for the question, Maria.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Not so far.
Let me.
Oh.
Can I just?
Maria, follow-up question, and then it's
there
was another person.
So are you then actually, to make them more comfortable, you come with something concrete, also something that they are familiar with. So we might jump into the abstract, and that's where the fear of the room comes in. But if you come in with something concrete, then that helps to build that kind of trust and confidence. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, this is what I say. And with concrete, it also means something familiar.
Okay.
And
all right.
Because I really like starting a philosophical process or dialogue from the concrete, and then move on to the more general and actually not general, universal. This is this philosophical movement, and then maybe back to the concrete. But the concrete, a concrete starting point or concreteness as a starting point is always very helpful. Yes, Taisia, I think it was you who had a question.
Yeah, actually, it wasn't maybe not more a question. It's like a combination of a comment and question, maybe. I just looked through the steps that you mentioned, and I'm thinking, so I understand this, the concrete part, the critical part, that first we need to choose something particular, not going not staying in the vagueness. Then we need to examine it, just as you did with me, to be on a different levels to investigate the case, let's say. Mm-hmm. And this theoretical part, I'm just thinking, if the if the client or student is not operating this theoretical basis, for example, I'm not good at it, definitely, but is able to produce something by himself. Anyone can produce some different, like different perspectives, views from different perspectives. I think that we can like interchange it. So the ones who are good at theoretical basis, they can produce theories and names and conceptions, and the one that are lacking this part might do just this differentialities of approaches. So just share different visions of how it can be perceived. Am I correct here?
Yes, you are correct. And what I can add to that is instead of theories, you could also use a movie, for example. Movies often contain also a form of theoretical, or they contain ideas or network of ideas. They illustrate a certain theory. You could also use that, but that comes just in addition. So it's not that you have to come up with a theory and the theory has to fit, and the theory comes from a great philosopher. Can also be your own thoughts, what it is, and you can theorize about what is, for example, hope. You can theorize that. Or
okay,
you can.
So then overall idea is like to broaden perspective, just to make it to give something else that the person is already having, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions in the chat. I would like to thank you all for contributing and listening. I hope it was informative for you. It was inspiring for me. Thank you very much for this whole session. If you have any questions, you can contact me with email. Yes, that is Michael. I can write it in here in the chat. Just a second.
While we're writing, I want to comment something to what Alexander was writing previously about niceness. I guess I won't be able to finish my message in chat. So Alexander was saying about niceness and philosophical practice. I just want to say that it's not about niceness, because niceness is on the surface. It's focused on myself. How do I look? Whether I look good or not good in front of my client. But when I was saying about interrupting and its appropriateness to interrupt, it was about am I ruining or not the atmosphere between myself and my client? Am I providing my best to create an open and safe atmosphere for him to think? Because in some cases, interruption might close the client, and it's not about me. It's about like interrupting the process that might go way better without me doing so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good. In that sense, I wish you all a nice conference, a nice further conference. I hope to see one or two or several of you in other sessions. Thank you very much for being here, and have a nice evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.